Good morning, everyone. You could just please take your seats. We're going to get started right away. My name is Linda Cook. I'm the CEO of Edmonton Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you all here this morning. In my capacity as CEO over the years, I get to introduce a number of people, and I always sometimes think the cliche is, this is a person who needs no introduction is overused. So I've only used it 3 times in my life. Over 35 years, this will be the 3rd time. This is a man who needs no introduction, but I will do my level best. Ken Haycock's newest venture is as a research professor of management and organization with the Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California, where he is establishing new graduate programs in library and information management. And this is a position that came to him out of the blue that they basically talked him into. He was almost ready to be semi-retired, and this was a position that he simply could not refuse to do. It's so exciting. He's also a senior partner with Ken Haycock and Associates Incorporated, focusing on authentic leadership and governance, strategic human resources management, and executive searches. He is Professor Emeritus and former director of the San Jose School of Library and Information Science, which is the largest graduate school in library and information science in the world, with more than 3,000 graduates in 14 different countries. He was formerly the director of the School of Library, Archival, and Information Studies at the University of British Columbia and a member of the senior management team at the Vancouver School Board. Dr. Haycock has been honored by several national and international associations for teaching, for research, and for service. He holds master's degrees in business administration, education, and library and information sciences, and has a doctorate in administration and leadership. Ken is an extremely popular speaker and has worked in all library environments and has been an elected school board official or school board chair and a municipal councillor. He is committed to high-quality leadership and effectiveness in the not-for-profit sector with a consulting force on higher education, public education, and public libraries. So prepare to be challenged, to be entertained, and quite simply, to be wowed. Please help me in welcoming Ken Haycock.
Thanks, Linda. Appreciate it. I just had the first experience ever in my career. The box for the lavalier mic fell on the floor as I got up. So I'm not doing this solely so you will lower your expectations, but rather for those few of you who wish to hear me, you'll have the opportunity now. So, thank you. I'm pleased to be here. We're ready to start now. I'm so honored to be a leader in residence at the Edmonton Public Library. I actually use the Edmonton Public Library. CEOs hate it when I say this kind of thing because I mean it as a compliment, but it always is kind of nerve-wracking and a bit concerning that I use the Edmonton Public Library as a model. I used them recently in an organizational review that I did for another urban public library where we pointed to Edmonton as, look at what Edmonton is doing with half the staff that you have. I mean, what is wrong here? So I mean that in a complimentary way, but I know at least half of you will be going out saying, you see, he told us we were understaffed. Well, I never said that. I said you're doing extraordinary work with the appropriate level of resources. To be in the company of people who have won so many awards and recognition for your work truly is an honor. And of course, people well know and respect Linda and Pilar across the continent, but we all know that people who work in the organizations are the ones who make them look good as well. So I thank you for being here this morning, and I appreciate the introduction. Lily Tomlin once said, when I was growing up, I always knew I would be somebody. I just wish I'd been a little more specific. And perhaps you feel that way sometimes as well. I'm going to talk about the power of influence, and I'm a little bit befuddled. Perhaps you've had this experience as well. I have a degree of certainty around what I'm going to talk about, but I actually went for an advanced training session in Phoenix last week for 3 days on this very topic. And so now I feel like I know less than I did a week ago and have more examples, and hope that you will find that it's useful. I know that for some of you, advocacy is an issue, and for others, it's not an issue, but influence in the workplace is a concern or something that would be useful. So I'm going to try and pull those two things together, looking first at advocacy, looking at 6 universal principles for influence that the research and evidence tells us is important for all of us in our lives, whether in the workplace or in advocacy or in our personal interactions with each other, and then I'll give you some examples of how they play out in our particular sector. I used to use the word industry, but people get upset about thinking of the library as an industry or a business. Of course it's a business. As soon as a dollar transaction occurs, it's a business. So whether it's a service business or a not-for-profit business is a different matter. I also refer to us as not-for-profits rather than non-profits. I always think of General Electric, or General Motors rather, as non-profit. I think we are not-for-profit, which is a little distinction there that we have to make as well. So here, I think, is our issue. And one of the conversation circles I'll be involved in is around roles. And we really need to determine what is our role? What is the unique value proposition that we bring to a community? I'll express my bias right off the bat, and that is that I do not think we're in the library business. I think we're in the business of Edmonton. Our focus should be, how do we improve the quality of life in demonstrable ways for people who work and live in Edmonton? Now, that is our job. That's what our shareholders, and I do believe that residents of the city who pay taxes are our shareholders because they're the ones who are primarily funding us, deserve to see some return on their investment in this particular agency that's improving their quality of life in rather demonstrable ways. So I think that our focus should be on what are we doing that makes Edmonton a better place to live and work. And what we're doing as a result of that, of course, is looking at the library resources that we have available to leverage in terms of services, programs, opportunities, and so on. Having said that, we have so many opportunities, and I think we almost suffer from death by opportunity. Everybody comes up with a great idea, and it is a great idea, but we're not very good at parking it and saying, that's a great idea. We had 3 great ideas last week as well. And right now, we're investing in so many opportunities that we're not doing anything particularly well. So what is our focus? Where are we going? I sometimes think, in spite of our service plans, our business plans, our mission statements, our visions, for many people who work in public libraries with whom I speak, I've determined that their unstated mission is really the same as the Hard Rock Cafe. Are you familiar with the mission of the Hard Rock Cafe? It's love all, serve all, save the planet. And I think deep down, that's really what a lot of us think we're here for. Love all, serve all, save the planet. Well, so what distinguishes us from a restaurant? What is our value proposition? One of the issues we have in the library industry or sector, excuse me just for a minute, is that we are almost unique in having in our field no commonly accepted key success factors. There is no agreement in our sector as to what constitutes success. You may have them in Edmonton. People who work in the organization may agree or disagree with them. I doubt that if we took a survey of this room, we would come up, even within this room, of a set of common key success factors. For some people, it's the percentage of residents who have a membership. For some, it's the circulation. For some, it is foot traffic or hits on the website. For others, it's more the effect of the programs that we offer. What percentage of children attend our summer reading programs? What effect did it have? Did they enjoy themselves? We don't tend to go to the point that many city departments are going, and that's measuring impact. In other words, what exactly is our effect on literacy in the community? If we have a summer reading program, do we have an effect on student achievement as a result of that, if that's our purpose? So the question is, what is the purpose of our programs? What are our key success factors? How do we measure it? And how do we communicate that to people for whom it makes a difference? We know that we have a lot of misconceptions about funding and funding from municipalities and provincial governments around what we do. I have an international research team that's looking at the factors that affect the decisions that are made by elected politicians and their senior bureaucrats in making funding decisions and policy decisions that would affect that particular sector. One of the things that we know is that we believe that funding is attitudinal, and people who tell us they love us, they support us, we feel puffed up and great, but we know that attitude is not behavior. So in many cases, we're merely being pandered to in the nicest possible way, but it's not going to translate into behaviors that it's going to make a difference to us. We know that we rely often on our intuition and believe that our intuition is satisfactory as evidence or data. But we also know that in our field, our intuition is often wrong. In fact, in most fields, our intuition is often wrong, even with our experience. For example, studies tell us that the strongest supporters of public libraries are people who never use them. So obviously, the answer to funding is to not let people in the door, right? No. We believe that our strongest supporters are those who are so nice to us when we do something for them. But in fact, the strongest supporters are those who never use them. The biggest donors to public libraries are people who do not have a card, do not have a membership. Now that's counterintuitive, right? And I could give you dozens of examples of counterintuitive evidence that should be affecting our decision making rather than based on what we think is the case. We just need to become much better, therefore, at being results driven and using data to make those decisions. We know as well that it makes a big difference if librarians are out in the community. Edmonton is a leader in this area, and are seen as passionate about what they're doing and speaking with a common message. So we know that how we're perceived is fairly important as well, and I'll be talking a little bit about that later in one of the 6 factors that I'll be looking at. We also know that information, if we place ourselves in the information marketplace, it's a very crowded place. And it doesn't have much cachet with decision makers. What does have cachet is when we can demonstrate that we're making a difference in the lives of people who use our services, who take advantage of our program, and we become a transformative force in that sense, in working with other not-for-profits, in partnering, in working with city departments to make the whole community more transformative in a very positive way. And that makes a big difference as well. So funding really is not attitudinal in terms of it making a difference, but we know that the attitude of the funder decision maker becomes critical in terms of moving towards behavior and making a difference to us. We know then that transformation is more important than information. We need to position ourselves as a critical piece of the infrastructure in the city, not simply an institution that needs support. And of course, we have a problem here, and this is a whole different presentation, but we have a problem here because we have huge advantage and benefits of having our place as an independent organization. I tend to call us quasi-autonomous because we have one primary funder, so that does constrain our autonomy, but we are at arm's length to some extent from City Hall. So there's a lot of advantages to that. There's a lot of advantages of having a board that is independent and making policy decisions in that kind of independent way. There's also a huge drawback because the connections aren't quite as strong then with City Hall, other city managers, directors of related programs, and so on. So we need to make sure that we're seen as part of that critical infrastructure and we're not out of sight, out of mind in what we do. Sometimes we're seen as just nice to have. No, we need to position ourselves as being a necessity and offering a return on investment. The old days when great cities have great libraries, great universities have great libraries, that is so last century. So last century. In the US, public library services being contracted out to private vendors who maintain they can offer better service and better facilities at lower cost. So we need to show how there's a return on investment as a municipal service. In the UK, for the first time, a major university outsourced its entire infrastructure, including the library. Why? They said there would be more advantages with a large third party because there could be more resource sharing. Now, we see that as one of our core values. Decision makers did not see it as something that we were providing evidence of at all. So we need to make sure that we're providing a return on investment in pretty concrete ways. Well, sometimes we do that through advocacy. So let's just talk for a minute about advocacy. Advocacy, to me, in our field, gets very much confused with public relations and publicity. Public relations and publicity, or advertising, are all about us. Here's who we are, here's what we do, here are the hours that we're open, and implied in that, if you had any sense at all, you would take advantage of these services and resources, right? It's all about us. It may be something we place in a brochure, a bookmark, a public service announcement, or whatever, but it's all about us. Marketing, a word that doesn't resonate in our community very positively a lot of the time, really is about respecting the client. Marketing is understanding deeply those with whom we work and wish to work, what their needs and desires and interests are, and how we match our resources and services with what client groups are looking for. And of course, we don't have one market. The needs of single senior citizens are much different, in my view, than a hormonally challenged 14-year-old. I don't know. It just seems like they might have different interests. And we need to start looking at our markets, but that's not what advocacy is. Advocacy, on the other hand, is a planned, deliberate, sustained effort to develop understanding and support incrementally over time. So you can't say we did advocacy last year and it didn't work. Advocacy is a planned, we've got a plan. Deliberate, we made a decision, we're going to invest in this. Sustained, it's ongoing, it's part of our organizational culture. Effort, it's hard work. To develop understanding, you can't get support without understanding and support incrementally over time. There's no short-term wins necessarily. It's investing in the future. And there are some rules that fit with that. Things like advocacy is about respect. I could never understand when I was a school board chair, we would go through these interminable budget meetings year after year. They'd last 6 weeks. And we'd get delegations, and I was the chair for a few years. And people would essentially say, their issue was always different, but essentially they say, you people are so stupid. You don't even understand what's important today. If you had any sense at all, you would give more money to X, whatever their proposition happened to be. And then they'd ask us for money. Now, what is wrong with this picture? You stand there in front of the cameras. We were on cable TV at 3 a.m., I think. You stand there in front of the cameras and the reporters tell me I'm stupid. And for me, they even picked on me worse. They'd say, and I don't even know who voted for you. You don't even have any children. Well, tell me I'm not going to pay taxes for public education and we'll have a discussion. But in the meantime, I have a right and I was elected. What is wrong with this? It is about respect. You have to respect the other person. It also is like banking. And that's the support and understanding. It is like banking in the sense that you can't make a withdrawal until you've made a deposit. And we need to develop understanding more. Advocacy is not selling our game or selling our name. It is developing understanding, making those deposits so that when we need to make a withdrawal, we can do that. An example. These are all true stories. Not that all my stories aren't true, but there may be an exception. When I was the chair, the vice chair was a corporate lawyer. He was never prepared. He would arrive and open the envelope that he was supposed to read over the weekend while we were having the delegations. So I'm smiling, being respectful to a delegation, happened to be home economics teachers. And he leaned over and he said, "Who are these people and why are they here again?" I said, "Well, Clive, they're here because they're telling us that home economics teachers don't just teach kids how to bake muffins anymore. It's all about technology and things like that." "Oh, okay." It's back to the meeting. 3 months later, we're in the back room deciding on a budget. He looks up and says, true story, "Well, I hope we're not cutting those home economics teachers. They don't just teach kids how to bake muffins, you know." That's about deposits, and we can never make too many deposits before we need to make withdrawals. The other point I would leave you is people do things for their reasons, not ours. We often feel that if somebody hasn't done what we want them to do, they just didn't hear, so we speak more loudly. Or the message wasn't framed properly. Well, maybe they just don't like what you're selling. People do things for their reasons, not ours. So when we're looking at advocacy, and I'll be talking to the board more about that this evening. I know there's some trustees here. We talk about the board's role in advocacy and working with city council and the provincial government. In fact, I think we should just vary the word advocacy when it comes to boards. What the board has a responsibility to do is to develop a strategic plan for the institution. One of its responsibilities is to develop a strategic plan for the institution with the input of the experts, obviously, in the sector. Develop a plan. Ensure that there's a mission statement that is, something that we can actually demonstrate we're doing, and then develop sustainable resources so that mission statement can be addressed and accomplished. Now, one of the ways we do that is through advocacy. There's lots of other things that we do as well, but focusing on the means, I think, is a mistake. The end is we want sustainable resources in order to do the good things that we do. So there is a gap there between the two. And we're talking here about influence, not about power. Power can be very coercive. Now, there are things like expert power, and we do demonstrate that to some extent. There's referent power, where people want to turn to us because we have something to offer them. There's legitimate power, our place in the hierarchy within our organizations. But those different approaches to power tend not to be very successful. What we've learned is that of the 300 different definitions of leadership, more than 300, this is about all that researchers in leadership can agree on. Almost every researcher and writer, thinker in the field of leadership would agree that, in fact, it's a process of social influence, okay, where one person is able to enlist the support of others in order to accomplish a task of some sort. So it's a question of social influence. If we force people to do things, we have not changed their opinion. We've made them compliant in the short term, but we have not changed their opinion. Leadership is about using social influence in order to make that change. Well, what do we know that works? Well, we know that history works. The best predictor of a library's budget is what they got last year. History works. Tends to go up 2%, down 2% over time. It can make a difference, but that tends to be what works. We know that the view of colleagues works. We know that if we're making a pitch and other people are doing something, then the people we're talking to are likely to come along as well. We know that for politicians, coalitions and networks tend to work in terms of advocacy. We know that connecting with others' agendas tend to work. as well. We know that when we can make emotional appeals, it makes a difference. For example, making a case for programs that we may offer for people who have English as a second language and helping them develop language fluency is very powerful when you use data. It's even more powerful if you add somebody who can talk about their story and how it made a difference. Offering opportunities for job seekers, saying we've got great databases and programs, who cares? That people liked it, who cares? If you can show what percentage of those people who participated got jobs compared to the general population, that makes a difference. And if you can add the inspirational appeal of someone who benefited, you really tend to have something there. So putting those two things together makes a difference, but connecting agendas with the funder becomes critical. I think we see that in our own organizations, that we are more influential as employees. I certainly found this throughout my career, and I could never understand why so few people do this. If I say to the person I'm working with, what is your agenda for the coming couple of years? I mean, what is it that you want to accomplish? And that's the only way I'm going to be able to go away and figure out what I can do to help you to be more successful, because in that way we're all more successful. It's worked for my career, I'll tell you, but I got to tell you, not very many people ever said that to me. And yet, that's what the organization is about. If we have a strategic plan and we're tied through common values and goals, then we all need to be working together in order to have impact. Otherwise, we're working as isolated people in an organization, in a branch, or whatever we want to talk about. Trust becomes the huge issue. When we look at making budget requests, for example, if you're a person of good character and they do not believe you're going to run off to rural Mexico for 10 years with the money, you're more likely to get it. If they think you're actually capable, you're more likely to get it. If you exude self-confidence, you're more likely to get it. We know from leadership studies that the single common trait of leaders, the single common trait is exuding self-confidence. Whether they have it or not, they exude self-confidence, whether they have it or not in private. And the fact of the matter is that exuding self-confidence brings people in to trust you more, because clearly you believe in what you're doing and where you're going. There must be something there. Your credibility based on prior practice, and congruence is the connection of agendas. When you're making a request and it connects with what's important to me, what I've articulated as our goals, you're going to get a better hearing than if there's a lack of congruence there. Well, sadly, we know these things about politicians, but we tend not to use them. In the studies that I've been involved in recently, and I will tell you about other studies as well, we know that the overarching criterion for politicians and decision makers is their personal values and beliefs. I know that some of you are in public education. I certainly found that through my career, that when I was working in the field of school libraries, where that represented the embodiment in a building of someone's philosophy of education, of teaching and learning, you were halfway home. Then if that particular approach to individualization, personalized learning, inquiry, and so on was beyond anything they believed in, you had a much more difficult time of it. The same thing is true here of values and beliefs, and belief about the outcome. And whether we trust our politicians or not, even when they're of a very different persuasion than us, they really do want to make good public policy. Their definition of good may be different from ours, but they want to make good public policy. They really want to satisfy their constituents. Nobody runs for elected office hoping they're going to lose, strange as that may seem. So they're not going to do things that they believe aren't going to satisfy them. Now, we have a little problem in our field. I'm sure that you are all the exception. But in our field, study after study tells us that we are left of center. Study after study tells us that politically, library staffs are left of center. some very left of center, some closer to the middle. So the evidence is, and we don't like to accept this, the evidence is that over time, in a number of jurisdictions that my group has looked at, right-wing parties are more supportive of public libraries than left-wing parties are. And yet we always believe that if we help to elect the left, we'll get more money. We never do, but they say wonderful things about us, and that makes us feel good. How pathetic is that? How pathetic is that? It's similarly true in most institutions. EPL is an exception. In most institutions that I've looked at, public libraries and academic libraries, the evaluation instruments tend to focus on two things. How many people attended, never what percentage of the target market compared to last year and 5 years ago, and are we making progress, just how many people attended and did they like us? They liked us. They really, really liked us. Oh my God, we're paying for 9 people to come to a program that costs $10,000 because they liked you? We have to become more sophisticated about this. So satisfying constituents, gaining influence becomes important. And we need to work with all types of people because we don't ever know where our support is going to come from. I've done some studies recently on networking, which we'll also mention in greater detail, about networking. And there have been some studies in succession management in organizations that suggest that your career will be enhanced by having different job opportunities. So you might do a rotation in somebody else's position. You might do a job exchange. You might have an opportunity to work on a special project. All those things are very important. But what we're beginning to learn is that it's not the knowledge and skills that you've developed that is most critical, it's the expanding network. So the network becomes really fundamental to an organization, that influence across networks, because then when you encounter a problem, you have somebody you can call, somebody who's experienced it, somebody who you've been in touch with. Unfortunately, this is being taped, or I'd say a whole lot more, but let me just think how I might express this. Linda mentioned that I have this new job at the University of Southern California. I have never worked anywhere like this. They have money. They have gobs of money. And I had all these conditions. I'm not willing to move from Vancouver. Oh, you don't have to do that. I have a consultancy and I want to maintain that. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not coming cheaply at this age. I've retired twice now. And so, well, how much do you expect to be paid? And I said, well, that's not how it works, actually. You tell me how much you're interested in paying me, and I tell you why it's not enough, and then we dance back and forth. Just tell, how much do you want to be paid? So I told them, I said, fine. I said, could we rewind just 30 seconds here, so we could replay this? I said, well, I need time to think about this. And I'm going to a conference in Dallas, actually, for 6 days, so let's talk after that. We'll meet you in Dallas. Okay. So we met for 3 hours over breakfast in Dallas. And I said, well, I have a couple more conditions, okay? One was that our program be in the Marshall School of Business, which is a nationally ranked school of business. I thought, well, that'll take them 3 years. We parted at 11:15. At 4:30, they called and said, it's done. I said, well, I guess you're not going to give me 6 months to think about this. Well, we were kind of hoping 6 minutes. And I said, well, how about 6 days? All right. We'll meet you in Vancouver in 6 days. They came with the contract. This position was not posted. U.S. Bureau of Labor tells us that in our field, 60% of the positions are not posted. So why did they call me? Because they hired a consultant to develop this program who told them there was only one person who could do this program the way they wanted. This person is a very dear friend of mine. The consultant said to the person who hired her, I don't know whether you've ever heard of him. The person to whom she was speaking said, he and I worked together at the University of British Columbia. Of course I know him. From that day until 5 weeks later, I'm a research professor at the University of Southern California. Now you may think, oh, that's a rarefied environment. That would never happen to me. Networks are critical. Networks are critical. And they become very important in the things that we do, especially as we come to understand what doesn't work in our field and how to actually make a difference. We know, for example, that demand for services makes no difference in our field in funding. In that sense, we truly are not a for-profit business. We know that as the economy goes down, demand for our services goes up and our funding goes down, right? That's not the way it's supposed to work. Demand for services doesn't work. We know that when our stakeholders appear before council and other bodies for funding, it doesn't help. Our boards often are not very useful in getting us those connections unless they've done the things that we're going to talk about. We know that evaluation of services doesn't necessarily work for funding unless it's evaluating the kinds of things that are important to the funder. So we know that there are a number of things that don't work in our field, but we still tend not to step up to the plate. We think we're not prepared. We don't have a plan. I'm too shy. Perhaps we believe that there should be a quick fix and it didn't work. A silver bullet, just tell me what to say to them, and it didn't work. Well, it's not going to be a quick fix. There's lots of problems and we need a plan and approach. And the plan and approach I'm going to suggest to you is based on 6 universal principles. They were developed by Professor Robert Cialdini at the University of Arizona. I was last week working with him. And I've had doctoral students look at these. One of these looked at one student who's just finished doing her doctorate at Queensland University of Technology with me, where I have an appointment. She studied the province of Alberta and found that 3 of these principles affected the rather large 40% increase in public library funding a few years ago when she looked at the principles involved. So we're going to look at these, and they work in the day-to-day workplace as well. The 6 principles are, first of all, reciprocation. We're raised as children to give, to receive, and to repay. Reciprocation is pretty critical for helping someone to move towards your position. And I'd like to just make clear I'm framing these in an ethical context. This is not for manipulation. It is not for using some information and not others. It's just what works in our day-to-day lives. And you think about it and they do work. So reciprocation. If you've done something for me, I'm more likely to do something for you. Liking is the second one. It's not whether I like you. It's you're making it clear that you like me that makes a difference. Okay? So there was that song, Love the One You're With. Well, like the one you're with. That's the rule here. Liking becomes important. Those 2 things are fundamental to beginning the relationship. Okay? Beginning the relationship. I've only been home for 1 day in the last few weeks, and I chair a municipal arts board, and we have some issues, and I need to get some feedback. I called the mayor from Phoenix and said, I just need 15 minutes of your time, Mike. I know you're busy. I'm only there Saturday. Can we have coffee or lunch on Saturday? He said, sure. We'll have lunch at 9:30. Well, he knows I like him. I know who he is. We have some similarities that we can draw on. I used to be on that council, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't get you what you want, but it opens the door. Reciprocation, liking. The next 2 are authority. We tend to give credence to people who are experts. Why? It saves us time. It saves us time. That doesn't mean we always listen to them, but if people are experts in their field, and I'm not talking about a major researcher, I'm talking when we go to the Apple store and I have to deal with that 22-year-old and look incompetent. I do feel like he or she knows what they're talking about, and I'm more likely to take their advice and listen to them because they have authority, they have evidence. So authority. Social proof. We tend to look at what other people are doing in times of uncertainty. I was involved in an informal analysis some years ago looking at funding with school libraries, and I'll tell you about public libraries in a minute. And of course what we found was that you can come up with all the evidence in the world as to how you're making a difference. I want to know what the other principles are doing. What do they think about this? And of course, this sadly is where waves occur against the evidence. If people move in a particular direction, or if a group moves in a particular direction. So social proof becomes important. Some people call it consensus. Then the next one is the most critical, and that's consistency and commitment. And that's my values and beliefs and what I've said publicly in the past. I'm not going to contradict myself unless there's overpowering evidence that I should change my mind here. So what I've said in the past becomes important, and that's why dealing with politicians and leaders, it's important to know what their public statements have been. So consistency, commitment, their values, and then lastly, scarcity. The more scarce something is, the more we want it. There is an issue, however, when we present ourselves as being free. How can we be scarce if we're free? So when we talk about dwindling services, dwindling output, dwindling contributions to the community, and we're the only people like us, well, we may be the only people like us around transformation, around partnership, about leveraging resources. We're not the only players in the information marketplace, and a lot of people believe that that's a free marketplace. So free becomes a bit of an issue. So you can frame them in this way. If you're building a relationship, maintaining a relationship, repairing a relationship, something that I've had a great deal of experience with, repairing a relationship, it really falls to reciprocity and liking. In other words, you have to have some connections with them, you have to have done something for someone, or they have done something for you, and you need to make sure that you like them. You can always, now I have found this very painful, but I know this from experience, you can always find at least some little thing to like in somebody else. Even when they're completely batshit crazy, you can find some little thing to like in them. So it is possible. So liking. Uncertainty, when people are uncertain, they tend to rely on expert opinion, expert evidence, and, although I think a lot of experts give their opinion, but anyway, expert advice, or what others who are similar to them are doing. We know that from studies in communities, and we tend to do what our neighbors do. Neighborhoods tend to look similar in terms of care of the yard, things like that. There are lots of examples of that. And then moving people to action when it's consistent with their values, consistent with what they've said previously, and it's scarce, tends to make a difference. So let's look, first of all, at reciprocity. We feel obliged to return favors to people. Now, this is enhanced through gifts, and a concession. Gifts. Now, what you're thinking immediately, partially because of my slide, is that a gift is a concrete object. No. A gift is usually unexpected, customized for the individual, and something that need not cost money. A gift can be a compliment if given sincerely. A compliment. A gift can be praise that you give to somebody for work well done. We know that a powerful gift is when we praise people to others when they aren't there, because it tends to get back. So those kinds of gifts need not cost money. But we even know that if you're giving a report to someone and you write a handwritten Post-it note on it and stick it on, it's more powerful than just giving them the report. It's customized, it's for them, it's a gift. It becomes really important. Our field. An example in our field is, and I used to hear this all the time when I was an elected politician, I went to their GD lunch because they invited me, and they never even acknowledged that I was there. They thought I went because I was interested? Well, someone is going to show support for you, you need to acknowledge them. You have your city councilor or your mayor in to read books to kids in the summer or for a special program. You make sure that you've got a photographer there and you've got a relationship with the press. They're not there for no reason. Some are. There are a few altruistic people out there. There's got to be some kind of reciprocation. Okay? So it's very important, too, to make a concession. What's a concession? Well, a concession is that, here's an example. You're doing a survey within the library, and you say, we have a survey that we'd really like to find out what our customers think about what we're doing, and we're wondering if you would mind filling it out. It'll only take you about 60 minutes. No. Oh, well, we have a shortened version that's only 10 minutes. Do you mind doing that? Percentages go way up. You've made a concession on their behalf. It's like a gift. We know that from evidence. We know that in restaurants, if you go into a restaurant, the average tip in the United States is 17%, somewhat higher than here. If the person comes and gives you your bill and smiles and thanks you for the opportunity to serve you, it goes up by about 3%. If they leave a mint at your table, it goes up by about 10%. I'm not talking about from 17 to 27. I'm talking about 10% of 17. But then nevertheless, you're making money on this. If the person puts down the bill, gives you a mint for each person at the table, turns and walks away and said, you know, you were such fun to serve. Here's a couple more mints. Goes up 26%. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't even eat those mints. And clearly, somebody can't be doing this to everyone. If you heard them just do it to the last 3 people who left, you're not going to think you're such a fun group that was really great to serve. It's just part of manipulation. But if it's done just, authentically, it makes a big difference. So reciprocation becomes really very important. It's just a different way of looking at things. And we also know from research that's been done, we have to become better about how we respond to our customers who say thanks. What do we tend to say? No problem. It's what I'm paid for. Not an issue. You're welcome. It's much more powerful if we say, if our positions were reversed, I know you'd do the same for me. Very stronger connection there, because there's been an acknowledgement that indeed I did give you something. I'm not playing it up or anything, or I'm always happy to go the extra distance for people who are regulars. You know, anything like that that acknowledges it in a different way becomes much more powerful. What about liking? Finding something to like in the other person. It's first of all very important to make sure that we are the person who does it first. In other words, we want to be the one out there to find things to like and praise about other people. We know that where there's similarity, it makes a difference. If you're making a connection with someone, and you're able to say, well, I understand your position, I'm a parent too. Or I can understand that I've been in that situation. That tends to make that connection and liking much stronger. So similarity becomes an important issue here too. Authority. I mentioned expertise. By the way, gifts can be things like advice, an opinion, a report. It doesn't have to cost anything. Praise. Those are all gifts that you can think of lots of. Giving people an opportunity. You work with somebody and you're giving them an opportunity to do something that they've wanted to do. That's a gift. So that becomes really important. Authority then. So what are the cues of authority? Well, I think we really lost something in our field, and I'm not looking at anyone here. I think we really lost something in our field and in other professional fields as well when our dress changed. Nobody wants to have a dress code anymore. You want to wear your lousy jeans that you couldn't get into a decent restaurant wearing? Well, that's fine, you wear them to work. Well, we know from research and authority that dress makes a huge difference. Dress makes a difference in how we look. Titles make a difference. Titles. You think about our field, we are so egalitarian, and that has a lot of positives, but we don't want to acknowledge the person who had 6 extra years of education in order to get that degree that may actually have some authority in the field and some expertise. We don't want to label that with a job title. We look down on people who might hang their degree on the wall in their office if they have an office. And yet those kinds of things make a difference in terms of authority. We're now starting, it's only recent, that we give business cards to staff who are going to be out in the community that indeed have their title and often have their credential there as well, because it does make a difference. So authority becomes very important in terms of what we're looking at here. And of course, authority also requires credibility and trustworthiness. So we can't keep saying, if you cut our budget by 10%, the sky is going to fall. No, it didn't the last time I cut your budget by 10%. It won't this time either. So that kind of trustworthiness becomes important, that if you want authority, I have to believe that what you're telling me really is true and that you are credible. So that becomes pretty important, and especially for people who are making the ask for funding or for policy changes. But it's also important, in my view, that we recognize that authority exists throughout the organization. I'm sure I'm not saying anything unusual here. It just strikes me as incredibly odd that you can have investigations into circulation policies and not include somebody who's at the desk all the time. Doesn't that strike you as odd? I was once involved with a regional library where they were looking at their bookmobile service. And I said, well, so what did the driver think? Well, why would we have the driver here? Well, half the time he's the only person representing you, talking to these people. Of course you want the driver here. So expertise can be based on experience that is unique to the individual as well, and that has to be taken into account. Social proof, I gave one example of this earlier. Let me give you another one. People who work in libraries, library directors in particular, like to compare levels of support by looking at dollars per capita. Well, I only get $23 per capita. They get $89 per capita. I wonder what they're doing differently over there that we should be doing here. In the lower mainland of British Columbia, that actually is the range, from about $23 to $89 per capita. So people living in a common geographic area hear that all the time. Oh, they get so much money over there, they must just waste it. They must burn it on Saturdays. You know. Well, when we started to look at social proof and why there could be that disparity among municipalities, we started to interview city managers, and we found that, in fact, although it was $23 to $89 per capita, every single municipality came in within 0.1 of a percentage of 4% of the municipal budget. So we had one level of social proof and data. The city managers clearly had a second level, which was not per capita, it was percentage of the budget. And if we're all giving around 4%, that seems to be like where we should be. So we looked at a different area. We looked at a more rural area, and we found there they all came within 0.2% of 2.7% of the municipal budget. So clearly in that area, they also talk to each other. I mean, we have our meetings like this. We have our conferences. We talk to each other. Well, so does every other group, formally or informally. So social proof becomes really rather important. Let me give you a common everyday example. If you stayed in a hotel recently, you've noticed in the last, well, some started 10 years ago, now everybody does it. There's a little sign in the room saying, I'm sure you too are concerned about the 3,000 pounds of detergent we use every week in this hotel, and we would like you to consider hanging up your towels. If you want them changed, put them on the floor. If you don't want them changed, hang them up. Fine. So about 33% of people hang their towels up as a result of that. If you put on the wall, in order to ensure that we're supporting and sustaining the environment, you hang your towels up, we will donate 10% of our savings to environmental causes. The percentage who then hang their towels up actually goes down. They do not trust the hotel to donate the savings to environmental concerns. So there isn't the authority, the credibility, the trustworthiness there. If you say, last year or last month in our hotel, 70% of the people who stayed here hung up their towels, resulting in a saving in room costs and also saving of the environment. Goes up again. Okay. Now, what has the highest effect? Last month, more than 80% of the people who stayed in this room, room 411, hung up their towels. It goes through the roof. Social proof. It's all social proof. We don't want to be the outlier. We want to be like the others who are similar to us. Okay? That happens in staff training. I used to work in staff training where we actually evaluated what we did. And what we found is that in sessions like this, presentation of information or theory, about 2% of you will change your behavior as a result of what I'm talking about. 3 months. So if those 2 of you wouldn't mind staying afterwards, we have a little side chat. I'll feel a little better about what I'm doing and so on and so forth. We know that there are 5 different levels in training and making a difference, and you can improve behavior 3 months later by going through these. The most significant change occurs when a group who works together, trains together, and one of them is the on-site coach. Now, what we tend to do in our institutions is we send one person out, right? We're so valuable, we couldn't possibly close for staff training. We send one person out, and then they come back and tell the others. Well, they can easily come back and say, this is ridiculous. I don't know who they think can do this. But it's harder to do that when the person next to you is doing it and seems to like it and offers to help. So that social proof, call it pressure, call it support, makes a huge difference to what we do. The core values piece, we know that consistency with our values and beliefs is what sends a lot of change management issues off the rails. We never talk about our beliefs. We talk about changes in roles, changes in behaviors, changes in strategies, but essentially, if somebody fundamentally does not believe that as a core value of their profession, they're not going to agree. Now, we get conflicting values in ours. I'll give you an example of a major initiative in the country for academic libraries, where we all believe in resource sharing. It's part of our mantra. It's our profession. Open access, unfettered access for all. Love all, serve all, save the planet. Until you mention that you're actually providing this access to people in another unnamed province, where the tuition fees are actually much lower than what you're paying and what your students are paying. And you essentially are agreeing to charge our students more in order to subsidize their free and open access to our resources. Well, all of a sudden we have a little values clash because we don't want to charge our students more, but we also want to share with everyone. So what the core value is becomes overriding, and we tend not to discuss values and beliefs when we approach change because it tends to be uncomfortable, so we don't want to have those courageous conversations. And often our core values and beliefs are not articulated, even in our own minds, so it becomes more difficult. But our core values and beliefs are critical to making a difference in what we do. And call it aligning agendas, call it consistency with values and beliefs, call it what you like. Here's an example where people from different sides of the political spectrum can actually have the same beliefs. I had an opportunity once to spend an hour with Jim Carville and Mary Madeline. I don't know if you know them. Jim Carville is a very left-wing Democrat strategist in the United States. His wife, Mary Madeline, is a very right-wing Republican strategist in the United States. And she started by saying, I know what you're all thinking. How can I possibly live with somebody like this? Well, every married woman in this audience knows the answer to that. Whoever listens to their husband anyway? So at the end of their presentation, I said to them, you two are in the highest level of government. You have the ears of presidents, leaders in Congress. You're in two different political parties. How can public libraries position themselves to make a difference on the political radar screen and for funding? They both, each, gave the same answer. Mary Madeline, right-wing Republican, said, if you can connect your agenda to literacy, that's what we're all concerned about now and what will make a difference to people's lives in this country. I'd like to see something that proves that public libraries make a difference to literacy, and I can't see anyone saying no to that. Well, many of us have that data. Obviously, we're not communicating it very effectively. Jim Carville said, I absolutely agree. In the Democratic Party, we're very committed to literacy, and I'd say, however, because it's our belief, we don't need the data. We believe that you contribute to literacy, so you need some visual images. Off the top of his head, this is why he's a top strategist, he said, you know, we need to hear things like, today in America, 3 branch libraries closed, and another candle for literacy went out. Isn't that powerful as an image? Very different data, and that's why we need both quantitative and qualitative, which is what I would call the stories or images, data to make our case. So our values and consistency with those values become pretty important. Scarcity. Well, scarcity, we value what's not available to us, and we tend to do that. You know, that's why, you know, when you call and ask if the sale is still on, they say, yes, but we only have 2 left. Do you want to give me your credit card number now? We're more likely to say yes, right? We know that scarcity is hard for us because there are others who play in the same sandbox as we do, unless we distinguish what we're doing. So what would be an example of scarcity in our field? Here's what I think is an example. Banned books. As soon as, I mean, there's nothing anyone can do better for us to increase demand for a title than to say they want it banned. Now, we think it's because they all have these prurient interests and want to get at the dirt. No, the issue is scarcity. They're afraid it won't be available. And so it has cachet. I want to see it before it goes. So scarcity becomes really important in that sense in terms of influence and people making decisions. So if you want to increase circulation, you could say, we're thinking of banning half the books in this branch. So talking about networks, I gave a presentation in Southern California a few years ago, and this woman came up to me and said, so you're talking about networking and advocacy, and I just want you to know that I also live in San Jose. I was living in San Jose, California at the time. And she said, so I'm taking a risk here. How would you and your wife like to come for dinner next Friday night? We just moved to San Jose. I said, oh, great, sure. She said, well, my husband's a bit quirky, but I think he can be okay in a social situation. But he's in water renewal. I said, water renewal? What on earth is water renewal? Anyway, we went to dinner. Well, Lisa and Eric are now very close friends of mine. And Eric is actually a researcher in water renewal. And we started talking about what we're doing, our interest. He was involved in this research project. They've given papers all over the world on how to get politicians to agree to a water renewal process in their community to save water, renew it, and so on. And I won't go through all the steps here, but the single most important thing they found was, how do we make this congruent with the politicians or decisions makers' values and beliefs about the environment? Core values become really critical. The others are, is this really an issue? If it's an issue, can we do it? I mean, do we have the technical know-how? What's it going to cost? Is there a cost-benefit analysis here? Do you think we can get political support? And then, you know, is there the values piece, which is really critical in the pyramid? So applying what we know then, we have in our field what a colleague of mine labeled, I just stole it shamelessly, a colleague of mine labeled the curse of high public satisfaction. The curse of high public satisfaction. What do I mean by that? Well, a director of an urban public library was moved over to City Hall when the director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture went on leave for 6 months. So she was director of the library and Parks, Recreation, and Culture. And she said to me, you know, it's really interesting. I get complaints about parks and recreation all the time. What do? We throw money at the problem. Make it go away. The field hasn't been cut. The recreation washrooms are filthy. The swimming pool opened half an hour late. Whatever. She said, do I get any complaints about the library? And her conclusion was, this just makes it harder to get more money because nobody's complaining about us. Well, we think that high public satisfaction is wonderful, and indeed it is. But unlike others, police and fire, for example, we don't get rewarded for bad behavior in the community. Crime goes up. They don't say to the police, you're not doing your job. We're going to give you fewer next year. No, they give them more, you know. They don't say we had 10% more fires next year. Why aren't the firefighters doing more fire prevention? We'll give you less next year. No, they don't do that. They give them more. That doesn't happen in our field. So we need to build on high customer satisfaction and make sure that we're being realistic, because we have high customer satisfaction because our communities have such low expectations. Now you're all thinking, that isn't true. I know people have high expectations. Generally speaking, expectations for public library service are so low. Essentially, I want in the door. I don't care who's there. Put a security guard there. I don't need to talk to anybody. We think, oh, that's outrageous, don't be silly. Well, there are several studies of urban central libraries. Example here, 70% of the people who come in the door never interact with a staff member, never. So those people we're talking to are a small percentage. And the people who are talking to a librarian are even a smaller percentage. So the question is, what does all that mean? Well, I was merely asked by Pilar and Linda to ask questions this morning, so I don't have the answer. But it is an interesting question, don't you think? I think we do have that problem. We also know that, just to give you an example, some examples from Cheryl Stenstrom's work, how this works for funding. We know that in Ontario, for example, in her study there of public library funding at the provincial library, the public library community for more than 10 years have been lobbying very hard for a return of provincial funding to the level that it was in the 1990s. That's their mantra. We want it returned to the level it was in the 1990s. She studied these three because in the same 10-year period, funding for public libraries from the province across the country went up 10%, and there were three outliers. Ontario, no change. BC cut 17%, and Alberta up 40%. So the difference. What she found in Ontario was that the government in power said, so all these librarians hate the other political party because they cut their funding. So what is the advantage to us of increasing the funding? They vote for us anyway. So why would we do that? That makes no sense. So what we have done instead is we put a lot of money, and the evidence was there, into projects that the library community wants to start on the basis that the library community will sustain them after the initial startup cost. So the library community designs the projects, Knowledge Ontario is an example. They get provincial funding to sustain it, and then once it's proven its value, libraries put in a percentage of their monies to share the resources. In almost every case, those projects have failed after provincial funding was withdrawn because we're interested in sharing if somebody's supporting it, but not if we actually have to put our own money on the table. It's very upsetting, but you can understand why they do it. In British Columbia, the provincial government was going to eliminate the provincial grant altogether. So the mantra today of the library community is we had a 17% cut. My response is, no, all the evidence is that you had an 83% win. I mean, you should be grateful. You had an 83% win. Government made a concession to you. And the only reason it wasn't eliminated altogether, the only reason that came out from interview after interview after interview from cabinet ministers, deputy ministers, people involved in the sector, and others, was the premier, who nobody liked, said there's no way we're cutting public library funding entirely when my major agenda is literacy. So Gordon Campbell prevented that from happening. In Alberta, it was years of work, reciprocity, liking, connecting with agendas, years of work of banking, making deposits, connecting with values and beliefs understanding what was happening with others, their experiences with libraries, as children in particular. The cabinet minister behind pushing, he wasn't the cabinet minister at the time, but we're pushing in the, and I can go into more detail about this later in the session that we're going to have, but who was responsible actually came in and said, I was a poor immigrant kid in school who didn't speak English. The school librarian and the public librarian saved my backside. If it wasn't for them, I would not be sitting here today. Reciprocity. Reciprocity. So, in essence then, we need to focus a little more. We need to focus on results. We need to focus on what our communities are looking for. We need to focus on data. And we need to focus on those relationships. Whether we're looking in our workplace, whether we want to be promoted, whether we want to get some support, whether time for a project we're interested in, whether we want to make change in a policy, those things are going to happen more if we have reciprocity and liking, the basis of the relationship, if we have some evidence, the authority, when there's uncertainty, and what others are doing. Now, what others are doing, it can also be, depending on the culture of an organization, helpful when it's anti-social proof. In other words, no one is doing this, we'd be out in front. That sometimes works as well. And also around consistency and our values and being consistent with those. So it's really about leadership, social relationships, social influence, understanding others, whether it's the person we report to or a politician. And excuse me, that we should make sure that this is part of our organization. And indeed, I think we need to provide training programs for our managers and others in building social influence, because that's what really makes a difference. It isn't the message so much as where we're going and what we're doing. So we need evidence, really, more action-based research projects. I personally think that we need a completely redesign of public libraries, and we need to use our branches more as incubators rather than rolling things out to the system as a whole, because I think we would become less risk-averse then if we were trying things in one branch rather than across the whole system. And essentially, the relationship is the message. The words are not so important as the relationship is the message. If I know you, if I like you, you like me. And actually, the evidence in liking is that I don't even have to know you. If I recognize you, there's a better chance I'm going to hear your case. If I just recognize you. So as Woody Allen once said, 80% of life is showing up. There is some evidence for that, actually. This, of course, is where we go off the rails. Personally, I think, this is my 5 years in California, we should do more whining, but without the H, in terms of building connections and networks. So the relationship really is the message. And you know yourself, if you are in a relationship, or you have had a partner, you don't tend to get someone to agree with your position through an inspirational appeal. You don't tend to get them to agree with you based on the cold, raw, logical argument you present. We tend to say things or act as if, you know, we've been together quite a while now. We share some common beliefs and approaches. And I think that, you know, this really is worth trying. What do you think? That is much more powerful than all the evidence you can put on the table. And that's what leads to moving our agenda forward if it's connected with the other person's interest, if it is doable and realizable, and if indeed there is that relationship there in the first place. If you think that you need an advocacy plan, whether for yourself or for your organization, you're 5 years too late. We need to do more developmental work before we can ever make the ask. So I would say that, as Roland Barthes, a philosopher, once said, excellence can be achieved by you if you care more than others think is wise, you risk more than others think is safe. You dream more than others think is practical. And you expect more than others think is possible. Thank you.
So we do have some time. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask Ken?
I hope so, or it would have been a waste of time if I didn't provoke somebody.
Sure.
Ken, can you talk a little bit about coalitions? How is that different from networks?
Coalitions, yes. Now, let me first start by saying probably the obvious, but I'd like to say it, that every organization is a unique social culture. Right? So what will happen in one organization easily and with great favor and support isn't necessarily going to happen in another. So let me say that first of all. Every organization is a unique social culture. So a coalition would be something like, instead of advocating on behalf of the library and its role in developing literacy in the community, coming together with other partner groups where you actually talked about literacy initiatives for the good of Edmonton and went forward as a group, as a coalition, if you will, in order to get greater funding for literacy across the city and across the groups. That means that sometimes you have to give something up, sometimes you're not going to be the main player, but a coalition like that tends to be more powerful because more connected people are being said no to or yes to as a result. Let me tell you a little story along that line. A colleague of mine who's director of an urban library in the US called together the executive directors and board chairs of other organizations in the city that were involved in English as a second language or English as additional language training. And they all came together and they met for a couple of hours and talked about what they were doing, what others were doing, where the gaps were, where the possible duplication was, and we're trying to approach this on a citywide basis around providing support for recent immigrants and ESL communities. She said to me that there were two conclusions at the end that she found interesting and somewhat disturbing. One was people said how useful the meeting had been because they had never met together before. Never. Now these are all not-for-profit groups, if you put the library in that category, working towards the same results, the same agenda, same community, had never talked, even though they're all basically tax-supported and philanthropy. The second comment was, and wasn't it interesting, who knew that the library would be interested in this? We make assumptions about what we're known about, what we're known for, and think that people would and should come to us because we have so much to offer. We have resources, we have space, we have professional staff, we have parking, we have continuity, but a lot of not-for-profits don't have. But in fact, those aren't seen often as something, and we need to, in my view, do a lot more around partnerships that could lead to coalitions, whether it's for funding or policy changes. I mean, we have advocacy programs for things that we say are good for our communities, but we don't tend to develop powerful coalitions within the community. Copyright is an example, fair use. I mean, we advocate it ourselves, but we don't present it as a community issue that we're advocating for. It's a library user issue that we're advocating for. So those coalitions become pretty important. As a politician once said to me when I was talking about support for business, now I'm on a tangent. A little bird walk here. A politician once said to me, because in my view, there are three power groups in the community. The elected politicians, whether they're city council, school board, whatever, the elected politicians, the business community, and the press. And it seems to me we don't give a lot of attention to those three, and we should. So I was talking to the president of the Chamber of Commerce and a politician about the business community. And I thought it was very interesting, the comment that was made. It was that the business community is very supportive of the library when it thinks about the library, which isn't very often. And one last tangential remark. From marketing, there's an acronym called FAB, FAB. And we tend to focus on features rather than advantages or benefits. So we typically say we have all these databases that would be very useful for small business. We don't tend to form a coalition or powerful partnership to talk about the advantages to a small business if they took advantage of our expertise and these resources. And we certainly don't say the benefits are, from our studies or other studies, that people who use this on average save $30,000 and hire 4 more people from our community over 5 years. That's a benefit. A colleague of mine uses the example that if libraries were gyms, fitness centers, they would say, you should come to our fitness center. We have 22 treadmills, and they are available for 30 minutes after signing up. And you can get a free towel, too. And for only 25 cents, we will give you a locker. And we have wonderful staff who will make you feel welcome. Is that what the fitness center says? No, those are the features. They say, you want to live longer? You want to have a good time? You want to meet your neighbors? We're open, whatever hours. We need to focus more on benefits rather than features.
Any other questions for Ken? Yes. Tina.
Yes. Hi, Ken. Wendy Newman had also mentioned, and so I've been having the discussion with frontline staff, that the strongest supporters of public libraries are people who never use the library. So, you know, we can easily see how this applies in perhaps our directors who, you know, go out and connect with the city councilors and that. But for frontline staff, you know, I mean, I have my own ideas of how it might be applied. You know, they ask that question, you know, okay, if this is true, how can I advocate for the library if they never come in our doors?
Well, I think that there are, OCLC did a study and they identified 3 groups of supporters, the super supporters, the probable supporters, and the non-supporters. And they felt that we should start with the probable supporters. So the super supporters can be active users or they can be people who don't use the library. Now, what does it mean the strongest supporters are non-users? That's kind of a black and white statement, and the world is gray. So take everything that I said in black and white and put it in the gray middle. But the reality is that those are often people who believe, core values, believe fundamentally that libraries are important to a healthy community. Whether they think they're necessary for them or not is another matter. So I don't think that we need to get them in the door and destroy their support. No. I don't think we need to get them in the door. I think we need to work with people who are coming in our doors and make sure that they're aware of the range of resources and services that we offer and the expertise that we offer. And I think that people tend to come in for their own singular reason and not be aware, sometimes because they don't interact with staff, sometimes because they come in for their own particular purpose. I would draw an analogy. I chair an arts board, and we run 3 or 4 strands, if you will, unique art movies, plays, popular music, and more classical music. And we operate day and night and 7 days a week. Well, our recent studies, I ask these questions, what is our data here? Our recent studies tell us that people tend to come for one of those 4 strands. They'll come to the movie nights, or they'll come to the performances, or they'll come for the music. They don't tend to cross over. Well, that tells us that we need to do more cross-program marketing. And so those are the kinds of things where I think we need to just make better known what we offer.
Very interesting and thought-provoking. An early comment you made about intuition. I think often we rely much too heavily on intuition. I'm recently reading a book by Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist. And he discovered that he, and like many other researchers, rely very heavily on intuitive or statistical intuition, which regularly is found to be faulty. So I think your emphasis on data and the importance of that is something we should all keep in mind as we make our plans. We really need some firm data. An old friend, Jerry Brown, always used to give us a hard time in school library field about the cardiac approach. In my heart, I know it's a good thing. We need to go beyond that. And thank you so much for your talk this morning.
I think that I've come to, now I'm going to say things that you all seemed like you liked my talk. Now I'm going to destroy it all right. I think that there are two features of library culture that are negative. There are many positive ones. I used to call it victimization and conflict avoidance. Poor us, nobody understands us, we're so poorly paid, not. It's dreadful, blah, blah, blah. Well, oh my God. And then conflict avoidance. If we avoid the conflict, somehow it'll go away. Well, it doesn't go away. And I think that what we tend to assume is because we believe something or we have the intuition that others just should. And it's not worth my time even talking about it, where the evidence is we've got to put it on the table to discuss it. And I think that what researchers label that more elegantly than I do is the culture of niceness. And somehow we have this culture of niceness, and the data may cause us to rethink or have to rethink some of the things that we believe, and we don't want to do that. I'm a data kind of guy, but I now realize that what we used to label as evidence and stories, fluff, are now more appropriately labeled quantitative data and qualitative data. And those different types of data resonate with different types of people and different types of situation, and we need both. So we need to find ways, in a way it goes back to the question that Tina asked, we also need to find ways to collect stories from our customers about how we made a difference so we have them to use when necessary. We find, too, that when those things are made public, they tend to make more of a difference. So if people are willing even to have their first name put on a story that's on a story wall or something like that, it becomes a more powerful message. I was told earlier that there's everyone is asked to have a goal around a certain area. We know from the 6 principles that I outlined, there's a way to make that happen, and we don't want to do it. It's called the culture of niceness, and that's that in a study of university students who are struggling in school, they looked at 3 different approaches to improve their grades by at least 1 grade over a semester. The first was they were referred to an advising center where they're given good study habits, programs and sessions and so on, and they went away. And indeed, about 14% had an improvement in their grade. The second was where they were asked to have a goal that they were going to accomplish in the next semester. Well, that, too, was only 14%. So there's no difference having a goal. None to having no goal. When they told people to write their goal down and post it on the wall with their first name under it in the advising center, 86% improved their grades. Now, imagine if in performance review, I should probably end on this, imagine in performance review, we all have areas to improve, if we each had an improvement plan and we each made known our goal for the next year, we would improve it dramatically. But of course we're never going to do that, right? I don't want to do it any more than you do. But in fact, it would make a huge difference. And it's not as if others don't know the areas we need to improve. It's not like it's a secret, Linda
said in her introduction that Ken would expect to be wowed. And I think, speaking on behalf of all of us, you've exceeded that expectation today, Ken. And I think we will refute your training statistic will impacting 2% of us, that we will much higher percentage will go away and make some change as a result of your enlightening talk. What a great kickoff to your time here as leader in residence. I want to thank EPL staff who are attending and also our library friends outside of EPL. There's a number of you who came to hear Ken speak. help me again in thanking Ken for this very inspiring talk.